You have been trying to reason your way out of things that reason alone cannot reach. The anxiety that persists despite the correct understanding that it is irrational. The grief that refuses to conclude on schedule. The anger that returns after you have analyzed it thoroughly and understood its origins completely. The fear that is not diminished by the argument that fear is appropriate only when the thing feared is genuinely controllable. You know the philosophy. You have done the intellectual work, and the emotional reality keeps arriving, unchanged, indifferent to the clarity of your thinking. Posidonius of Apamea, the 1st century BC Stoic philosopher, historian, geographer, and scientist who was perhaps the most broadly learned person in the ancient world, said this is not a failure to practice. It is a failure of the philosophy. Specifically, a failure of the version of Stoicism that preceded him. The version associated with Chrysippus, which held that all emotions are cognitive errors, that the passions arise from false judgments, and that the philosophical correction of the judgment eliminates the passion. Posidonius looked at the evidence, including his own interior experience, and said the theory does not match the data. The passions do not always arise from false judgments. The anxiety that remains after the correct judgment has been made is not evidence of a hidden false judgment. It is evidence that the soul has parts that are not reached by argument, and that any philosophy that pretends otherwise has not understood what it is dealing with. The Chrysippean position, the mainstream Stoic view that Posidonius was critiquing, has an appealing clarity. If emotions arise from false judgments, then emotional suffering is curable by the correction of judgment. You are angry because you have judged that something genuinely bad has happened to you. But in the Stoic framework, nothing external is genuinely bad. Only your response is within your control. Correct the judgment. See that the external thing is indifferent, that only virtue matters, and the anger resolves. This is elegant. It is also, as Posidonius observed, incomplete. Because even in the person who has genuinely corrected the judgment, who genuinely understands that the external thing is indifferent, who has not merely said this but actually understood it, the emotional residue often remains. The person who knows they should not be afraid is still afraid. The person who has correctly assessed a loss as not genuinely bad in the Stoic sense still grieves. Something is happening that the cognitive account does not explain. Posidonius' explanation draws on Plato, specifically the tripartite psychology of the Republic, in which the soul has a rational part, a spirited part, and an appetitive part. The spirited and appetitive parts are not reducible to the rational. They have their own logic, their own responses to the world, their own ways of being affected. And a philosophy that addresses only the rational part has addressed only 1/3 of what it is dealing with. The emotions that persist after correct judgment are not evidence of hidden cognitive errors. They are evidence of the other parts of the soul doing what those parts of the soul do, responding to the world through channels that reason does not fully control. This is not a counsel of despair. It is the beginning of a more accurate and more useful account of what philosophical practice actually requires. Posidonius was born around 135 BC in Apamea, a city in what is now Western Syria. He studied philosophy in Athens under Posidonius, the head of the Stoic school who had already begun the process of moderating the more extreme Chrysippean positions. He eventually settled in Rhodes, where he established a school that became one of the most prestigious intellectual centers in the Mediterranean world. Cicero studied with him. Pompey visited him. Strabo called him the most learned person of his age. He was not primarily a philosopher in the narrow sense. He was an encyclopedic scholar. He wrote on history, a continuation of Polybius covering the period from 146 to 88 BC, on geography, a major work on the physical world that influenced Strabo and Pliny, on mathematics, astronomy, natural science, and ethnography. He measured the circumference of the Earth. He produced the first serious account of ocean tides. He traveled extensively to Spain, to the Atlantic coast, to Egypt, possibly further, combining philosophical reflection with direct, empirical observation of the natural world. His philosophical work is almost entirely lost. We know it primarily through later authors who quoted, summarized, or argued against it. Galen, who drew on Posidonius psychology extensively, Cicero, who incorporated his ideas into the Tusculan disputations, and later commentators on Plato and the Stoics who found his synthesis worth engaging. What survives is enough to reconstruct the core of his philosophical contribution. The argument that the orthodox Stoic account of the passions is wrong, that a fuller account requires a tripartite psychology, and that genuine philosophical practice must engage all three parts of the soul rather than only the rational. The philosophy, what the tripartite account means in practice and why it matters. The rational part of the soul is the Stoic hegemonicon, the governing faculty, the part that reasons, judges, assents, or withholds assent. This is the part that Chrysippean Stoicism addresses. The philosophical work of examining judgments, correcting false beliefs, practicing the dichotomy of control. All of this is work with the rational part, and it is genuine and important work. Posidonius does not dismiss it. What he adds is the recognition that the spirited part and the appetitive part have their own ways of responding to the world that are not fully governed by the rational part. The spirited part, the thymos, the seat of pride, honor, righteous indignation, courage, responds to threats to status and dignity with a force that is not simply the downstream product of a cognitive judgment. The appetitive part, desire, hunger, the pull of pleasure and the push of pain, responds to the world through the body in ways that the reasoning mind can observe but cannot simply override. A philosophy that only addresses the rational part will produce a philosopher who understands a correct position but experiences the persistent pull of the other parts as an embarrassing failure, a gap between the philosophy and the life that no amount of further philosophical reasoning seems to close. Posidonius says, the gap is not a failure of the philosophy's application. It is evidence that the philosophy is incomplete. You cannot reason the spirited part into compliance. You cannot reason the appetitive part into silence. These parts require different practices: habituation, embodied practice, the cultivation of the character at levels deeper than the cognitive. This is where he meets Aristotle. The Aristotelian tradition, which Posidonius drew on alongside Plato, had always insisted that virtue is a matter of habit, of practice, of the formation of character through repeated action. You do not become courageous by understanding courage. You become courageous by doing courageous things until the doing becomes second nature. The spirited and appetitive parts of the soul are formed by what they repeatedly do, not by what they understand. The practical implication is significant. If the soul has three parts and genuine philosophical practice must engage all three, then the philosophical life requires more than the examination of judgments. It requires the habituation of the spirited part through practices that develop genuine courage, genuine equanimity in the face of insult and failure, genuine capacity for righteous anger directed at what actually deserves it. And it requires the training of the appetitive part, not through suppression, but through the development of genuine, settled preferences for what is genuinely good. Now the bridge. Because Posidonius was a 1st century BC Stoic philosopher arguing within the specific context of a technical debate in ancient Hellenistic philosophy, and most people watching this video are not. But here is what translates directly. The philosophy you have understood and not fully lived. The practice you have intellectually absorbed and that has not fully changed the emotional reality. The anxiety that persists despite the correct understanding that it is irrational. The grief that knows the correct Stoic analysis of grief and remains grief. The anger that has been examined thoroughly and keeps returning. Posidonius is not saying the analysis was wrong. He is saying the analysis was incomplete. The parts of you that are not addressed by argument are real parts that require real practices. The body that carries the anxiety needs something different from the correct cognitive account of why the anxiety is not warranted. The spirit that has been repeatedly insulted or defeated needs something different from the philosophical argument that insult and defeat are indifferent. The character that has been formed by habit over decades needs something different from the understanding that the habit should be otherwise. The philosophical life that Posidonius is describing is a more demanding and a more complete life than the purely cognitive version. It requires all three parts. It requires attention to the body, to the formed habits, to the character that is being shaped by what is repeatedly done, not only to the quality of the reasoning. Here is what Posidonius asks of you, practically, today. First, identify which part of your soul you have been neglecting. Most people who engage seriously with philosophy and self-development have a strong relationship with the rational part, the examining, analyzing, judging part that most philosophical traditions address most directly. The question is which of the other parts has been left to develop on its own, shaped by the habits and circumstances of the life, rather than by deliberate philosophical attention. The spirited part. Have you been developing genuine equanimity in the face of failure, insult, and the threat to your dignity? Or have you been understanding why you should have equanimity while experiencing the persistent reaction as though you don't? The appetitive part. Have you been forming genuine, settled preferences for what is genuinely good? Or have you been reasoning about what you should prefer while the body and the desire continue to pull in other directions? Name the neglected part, not to condemn it, to begin attending to it. Second, find the practice that addresses what argument cannot reach. For the spirited part, the embodied practice that develops genuine equanimity rather than the intellectual understanding of it. The deliberate exposure to minor failures without the defensive reaction. The practice of not responding to insult with the habitual defensiveness. The repeated doing of the thing that the spirited part resists until the resistance diminishes not because it has been argued out of existence, but because it has been habituated out of it. For the appetitive part, the training of genuine preference through practice rather than understanding. The repeated choosing of the genuinely good over the immediately pleasant. The development of genuine sensitivity to what the body needs as opposed to what desire wants. The embodied practices exercise, diet, sleep, the management of physical comfort, not as moral disciplines, but as the formation of the appetitive part through what it repeatedly experiences. Third, examine one persistent emotional reality with fresh eyes. Take one emotion that has resisted the philosophical correction, that remains despite the correct analysis, that persists after the judgment has been examined and found to be sound. Apply the Posidonian question: which part of the soul is this arising from? Is it a cognitive matter, a false judgment that further philosophical work can address? Or is it the spirited or appetitive part doing what those parts do, responding to the world through channels that reason observes but does not fully control? If it is the latter, what practice rather than what argument does this part require? What does the habituation look like, the embodied practice, the repeated doing that forms this part of the soul differently rather than merely understanding it differently? Fourth, integrate the three parts in one day. The Posidonian philosophical life is one in which all three parts are being attended to simultaneously, not sequentially, not in separate domains, but in the integrated life of the person who is developing the reasoning, the character, and the embodied preferences together. Find one day, today, in which you bring deliberate attention to all three. The rational, one genuine philosophical examination of a belief or judgment you are carrying. The spirited, one practice of equanimity in the face of something that habitually produces the defensive reaction. The appetitive, one genuine choice of the genuinely good over the immediately comfortable. Not dramatically, as the ordinary practice of the person who has understood that the philosophy requires more than the philosophy. I want to close with the image that Posidonius offers, not in his own words, since those are mostly lost, but in the reconstruction that his argument makes available. The philosopher who has addressed only the rational part is like a person who has renovated the top floor of a house, while the foundation and the ground floor are unattended. The reasoning is excellent. The structure is elegant, and the house keeps developing problems that the renovation cannot explain because the problems are not in the part that was renovated. The complete philosophical life, the life that Posidonius was proposing against the Chrysippean orthodoxy, attends to the whole structure. Not only the reasoning that is done at the top, the character formed at the ground, the habits built in the body, the preferences shaped by what is repeatedly chosen and repeatedly experienced, the spirit developed through what it has repeatedly faced. You are not only your reasoning. The part that reasons is the part most accessible to philosophy in its conventional forms. But the parts that are not reached by argument are not less real, not less important, and not less yours. They require their own forms of attention, embodied, habitual, character-forming, repeatedly practiced, and the philosophical life that ignores them has addressed 1/3 of what it set out to address. Attend all three. The complete philosophy is the one that does. Here is the question Posidonius leaves us with today. Which part of your soul has been shaped primarily by circumstance rather than by deliberate philosophical attention? The reasoning, the spirit, or the appetite? And what is one practice, not one argument, one practice that would begin to address that part as it actually requires being addressed? Leave that in the comments, because naming the neglected part and committing to the practice that addresses it is the beginning of the Posidonian philosophical life. The complete philosophy. All three parts, the whole structure attended to. I'll see you in the next one.